have an enemy? What happens in your body when you feel like, here's my enemy? I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I believe every single one of us has had many of those moments. Maybe some of us live in those moments all the time. When the world is against you, people are, there's nobody for you, and you just feel like it's all enemies. Well, Jesus didn't live that way, and we don't have to either. In my conversation today, we are going to address brain science and enemy mode. We'll unpack what all that means. My guest is Ray Woodridge. He has 2 master's degrees. He spent over 40 years in the military, ending his career as a U.S. Army Brigadier General. That's pretty high up there. He's got some experience there. He is now the executive director of Life Model Works, an organization started by Dr. Jim Wilder, who has done some amazing work in brain science, neurotheology, bringing those things together. One of the basic contentions of their work, Dr. Jim Wilder's work and the Life Model Works program, is that we are intended to relate to people being in relational mode, that's how God designed our brains to work. When we get out of relational mode, that's enemy mode, and nothing good happens there. But how do we deal with that? How do we get out of enemy mode when it seems like there are so many enemies? Is it really safe or possible to live that way? Well, Ray Woodridge and Dr. Jim Wilder have released a book, Escaping Enemy Mode: How Our Brains Unite or Divide Us. This brain science thing and how it applies to us as humans and spiritual formation, this is the kind of conversation I so enjoy. And without waiting any longer, Ray Woodridge. Ray Woolridge, it's an honor and a delight to have you on the program today. First of all, just thank you. It's great to have you here.
Well, Carol, it's a delight to be with you today. What a needed topic. And I just really appreciate all you're doing to encourage people in their marriage and relationships.
Well, thank you. We're talking about escaping enemy mode today. You and Dr. Jim Wilder have released this book recently, and I was fascinated by some of the things that you've presented. And when brain science and theology can come together, that's kind of what I kind of nerd out on all of that. I love that, and I think it is so helpful. Maybe just as we start, a word about just that, bringing brain science and theology together to help us become who Jesus wants us to be.
Sure. For the past 500 years, Christianity has been a pretty left brain endeavor. Yeah. And the focus was on the prefrontal cortex and thoughts and beliefs and creeds, and without an understanding of how the brain actually learns. And the reformers did the best that they could, and the church since at that time did the best that they could. But beginning in the 1990s, when we could actually scan a living human brain,
yeah,
and then to begin to understand what various structures of the brain are doing, a lot of ancient practices actually started to make sense, and we could see them for the first time. We also saw in the way the scriptures have been translated since the King James Version out of Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew, out of Hebrew and Aramaic into Greek and Latin and English. Our faith, our walk with God became increasingly disembodied. And it's more and more what you think and whether our beliefs agree, without a thought as to, wait a minute, what does this feel like in our body? Yeah. And what are our emotions telling us? And so the research in escaping enemy mode really is based on Dr. Wilder's career and many who are discovering that there is such a mind-body connection, a soul-mind-body connection that cannot be separated. And so we're getting after what is it that makes us fully human so that we can live for Jesus in every aspect of our body and recognize when we're in distress and recover.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
The left brain, right brain thing, I have been just fascinated by some of that I have been learning recently. And I have, in the coaching part of my world, I have been explaining that to the people that I work with. And it has made such a big difference, just to help them understand that stuffing facts into your left brain doesn't change what your right brain does, how your body feels, how you bring yourself to the world. The left brain isn't the master switch, and just more facts doesn't really change us. And perhaps that's especially true when we're talking about enemy mode, our topic today.
Yeah, and we would say what you just said slightly differently, because there's so much misinformation in the culture about left brain, right brain. Left
Right.
brain's more logical, right brain's more creative. That's all a bunch of, I think, a bunch of hooey. But that said, the left hemisphere of the brain does different things and has a different
Yeah.
purpose than the right hemisphere of the brain. And actually, the left hemisphere of the brain is not the master switch. It's not the master
Right.
control center. Actually, the master controls come from the right hemisphere. And if the right hemisphere is desynchronized from the left hemisphere, then we're going to have a problem. And the right hemisphere also runs faster than the left hemisphere. So we've all had this experience. We're feeling something and we can't put words to it yet.
Yeah.
And our right hemisphere is telling us we're angry, we're afraid, we're frustrated, whatever. And later we can explain it. Well, that's an example of this disconnect, this desynchronization. And when Jim started looking at the science, he realized, wait a minute, there is a non-relational brain state that we all can fall into, where we see the person in front of us as an enemy to be defeated, not a person to be loved. And knowing how to recognize that and escape it is what we were hoping to discover in our research together.
Yeah. And you've just entered the whole idea of enemy mode here. Let's just be explicit. Give people a just kind of an understanding of what that is. What are we talking about escaping?
Well, of course, they need to buy our book. But let me give you the Cliff Notes version. Okay, so enemy mode is a non-relational brain state where people around you are not people, they're objects, and they're problems to be solved. And we're not relating to them as human beings. They're tools in our tool bag, as it were, to fix a problem. Now, there are three modes of enemy mode, or three levels. One of them is a simple low energy, non-relational state where I'm so focused on my work that that person calling me, that person knocking on my door who wants to ask me a question or interact with me is an irritation and an interruption, causing me not to be able to do my work. And I don't respond with energy to them because they don't feel or seem at the moment personal to me.
Yeah.
So that's simple enemy mode. And there are people, and I'm one of these people, who can live a lifetime in simple enemy mode, convinced that no one wants to connect with you deeply.
Mm.
Stupid enemy mode, everyone can identify. It's when people are acting out loudly, usually with some profanity, maybe under the influence of some narcotic or drug, and everybody wants to get their iPhone out and start recording to post to Twitter about a ridiculous interaction. And it's a very high energy moment where most of the time we do damage to people or things we value. Now, intelligent enemy mode runs in the middle of the energy spectrum. And I went into this project thinking that maybe intelligent enemy mode was only seen in the worst of the worst. I mean, the dictators and the tyrants and serial killers. And then I discovered, actually, enemy mode is anytime I use my intelligent enemy mode is whenever I use my emotional intelligence to go for a win. And as long as I win and you lose, that's a win for me.
Wow.
And it's very manipulative. And I've seen pastors do it.
Yeah.
I've seen it in board meetings. I've seen it in the military. I've seen it all over the place. And I've done it myself.
Yeah. How is this different from being angry? You described the crazy or stupid enemy mode, but how is enemy mode different from simply being angry? I think probably most of our listeners, viewers, will recognize that Jesus was angry at times, but I think we'd all have to say he is our pattern, and so this must be separate from that. Differentiate that, if you would.
So anger is a common human emotion, like fear, despair, like disgust and shame. These are all parts of the human psyche. And our emotions are not wrong; they just are.
Mhm.
And it's what we do with them.
Mhm.
And it is possible to be angry and non-relational and cause harm. At the
Yes.
same time, it is possible you can be angry but stay very relational to the person. And you're expressing your distress and anger at whatever has just happened, but you're staying connected both to the Lord and to that person. And so Jesus modeled that perfectly well many times. And when he turned over tables in the temple courts, he was doing it from a place of compassion. He was doing it from a place of righteous anger. They had trivialized a relationship with God and made it a business transaction in a place that should have been a house of prayer.
Yeah.
And his heart was breaking as he did that. So I think he was very relational. The trouble is we're human beings, so we miss that point. And if we've seen anger modeled, where the anger is destructive, and where the anger is directed at an object, and we've seen that modeled throughout our life, we don't know that there might be another option.
Yeah.
That it's possible to be angry together and work on a solution, or to be fearful together and seek the Lord and seek each other to get to a better place, to
Mm.
recover from the upset caused by anger or fear.
I can think of another New Testament passage where it says Jesus looked around at them with anger. He's in the synagogue teaching, and then he heals the man with the withered arm. So anger and healing in the same moment. That sounds pretty relational.
Absolutely. And so the interesting thing, so I remember as a child growing up in the church in the South, oftentimes we used the King James version. And there was this peculiar expression where it was called the bowels of compassion.
Yes.
And the word compassion that we translated in English sounds very intellectual, sounds very left brain. But in the Hebrew, that word relates to the splanchna. It relates to your guts. And Jesus did that because he was disgusted and felt a churning in his guts that moved him to action on behalf of that man. And that's a mind, body, spirit connection right there that we saw Jesus model, that perhaps in our English translation we miss out on.
Yeah.
We miss the original context and the brain science.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, I want to get to relationships and church here in a minute, but before we do, you spent decades in the military, and one of the things I found fascinating in Escaping Enemy Mode was how the principles you and Dr. Jim Wilder work out here apply in the military, where you think we're all about dealing with the enemy, but you apply this in some really amazing ways in the military, and I uh, just a moment on that.
You know, the best leaders that I've ever seen in the military or in any setting, but the best leaders could always have a great balance of getting the mission accomplished and staying relational with their team.
Mhm.
The best leaders were always able to make people seen and heard and valued as team members and build a more effective, cohesive unit. And the worst, the ones who struggled, were the ones that they may have been very smart,
Yeah.
and may have been very motivated and very driven, but they left their team feeling unseen and unheard.
Mhm.
Now, even worse than that are the people who turn the enemy into, they don't even see any humanity in their
Yes.
enemy, right?
Yes.
And so I think a lot of soldiers and airmen and Marines who come back from combat, who dehumanize the enemy in their own hearts just so they could do their duty, have done great harm to themselves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the military, it's a blunt instrument. And so we train soldiers and airmen and Marines and guardians to go into those settings and to ignore what their amygdala is telling them.
Mm. Mm.
And yeah, they're bonding to a unit, but it's all about close with, get close to, and kill or capture the enemy.
Yeah.
And there's a time and place to shoot at someone who is shooting at you. There's a time and place to do things to stop the violence that require equal amounts of violence. But then what do you do when it's peace now and you're back home, and how do you deal with what you did?
Mhm.
And I think we've unintentionally done some damage to service members who were not equipped for that. And anything that the military does in basic training to dehumanize the
Yeah.
enemy is a
Yeah.
terrible thing and really unnecessary. And so as I look at my military service, I know there's a better way. And I also know that when you're in enemy mode, when you're operating in enemy mode, in a sense, you're using half of your brain.
Mm.
And so you can't be creative. You can't value and hear what people around you are doing. And there is a better way. And in fact, if you're actually pretty good at intelligent enemy mode,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you've learned about it, then you can be a better protector because you can think about a war game in your head, what the enemy's going to do,
Mm.
and know
Mm.
how to protect from what they're about to do or what they might
Wow.
do.
Wow. um, just about every area of human endeavor we could apply this to, but I do want to get to human relationships, especially marriage and intimate relationships. As we get to that level, one thing that occurs to me, I've been told that I'm a pretty emotionally intelligent person, and I've been told that I can sense a lot about what is going on in the people I'm with. And I tend to see women having maybe a broader emotional vocabulary, or just more aware of that. It seems like on average, more men seem to struggle more. And I just want to out with the question: are you asking men to become more like women?
Oh golly, no, of course not.
Right.
Uh, but look, I'm one of those guys who had a very limited emotional vocabulary. I started reading Daniel Goleman's books about 10 years ago, hoping that that would help me be more sensitive to my wife and my family. And I started developing that vocabulary and that knowledge. But my story is similar to what many men's story. If you're not crying or bleeding or shouting, I miss the emotional cues. And so if you're crying, I can see that and I can respond. And if you're bleeding, well, let's get a band-aid. And if you're shouting, then I can deal with anger, but sadness and hopeless despair and those more subtle senses of shame that are really all over people's faces all the time.
Yeah.
Now, why wouldn't a man want to be a better husband, a better father, a better boss, actually,
Mhm.
and pay attention to the emotional cues that are happening all the time, all day in everybody? And but we can miss it. And so I think that becoming, and I think also, Carol, it's more than being emotionally intelligent, because emotional intelligence can get you so far, but if there's no attachment to the person or people you're dealing with, it can empower intelligent enemy mode.
Mhm.
That's one of the things I was surprised. Predators use emotional intelligence to be better predators.
Yeah.
And so if you send them to a class about anger management and emotional intelligence, they'll come back better equipped to do a better job of being a predator. And
Mm.
what solves intelligent enemy mode is an attachment signal. So if that person that I'm dealing with is actually, I love them and we're in a relationship
Wow.
or we're connected, then it's so much harder for me to consider them my prey. Now,
Wow.
you've got to start recognizing where you are going into enemy mode. And so for the men out there who are listening to your podcast, I would say pay attention to what your body is telling you. God gave it to you for a reason, and begin to recognize, so when I'm angry, what's my body doing? When I'm afraid, what's my body doing? When I'm ashamed, when I'm disgusted, when I'm just sad, when I'm in hopeless despair. Notice the things that are happening in all of those big six emotions. We were actually given 7 hardwired emotions that are the base emotions, the seventh being joy. Joy is we're happy to be together.
Mhm.
I'm happy to be with you right now. We're working on this together. And that just feels really good in here. Well, all the others are more negative expressions of that. So if the men would recognize those emotions and be able to see it in themselves and voice it, it could be the beginning of a game changer.
I hear from husbands who talk with me, um, that will say things like, I want my wife to want me. And what you're describing as a woman would totally change my experience of a man. My husband has passed away, but the experience of a man, just having that kind of attachment. I want to kind of flip to the other side of this. Another area that I hear a lot of, in this case, mostly women struggle with, is being in a relationship, in a marriage with a person who, in a lot of ways, act like an enemy. They are uncaring, unfeeling, hurtful, sometimes abusive. And they may hear some of what we're saying is, oh, I just need to work on my attachment to this damaging person. Unpack that for a minute. How does this apply in a potentially truly destructive relationship?
Well, so boundaries are important.
Yeah.
And a wife is worthy of protection.
Mhm.
And Henry Cloud wrote about boundaries decades ago. And we were always thinking about boundaries. When I read that book, I was thinking about boundaries with those other people in the workplace, and then didn't realize, wait a minute, there needs to be boundaries in every relationship. And I think biblically, looking at how I look at it now, I don't think it's God's will for a woman to just stay there and take it. And in fact, it can be downright dangerous to do that. And so obviously she will need to protect herself, but depending on the willingness of her husband to get help. My wife doesn't want me. Well, what's that telling you about your marriage and how well you are loving her and how well you are loving her like Jesus loved the church? And one of the most humble things a man can do is admit, yeah, I've provided and I've paid the bills and given us a roof over our heads. Maybe we both did that together, but mainly it was my career, not your career. But I have not been present emotionally. And so, and I'm one of those guys. I mean, I have an unhealthy attachment tendency where I'm all about the job. I'm all about the task. And as long as we're getting stuff done together, I'm happy. And I miss, oh, wait a minute, we did things together. A story from my marriage early on. I was exhausted, and I tell the story in the book. I was exhausted one night. I was pastoring a church. I had no work boundaries. We had 5 small children at home, 60, 70 hours a week of work. That particular night, I trundled the kids off to bed. Deborah was cleaning up in the kitchen, and then I just sat on the sofa and read a book. I just needed to disengage, but I didn't verbalize any of this. I didn't talk to her. And so after a while, she said to me through tears, I'm not important to you. And I had no idea what she was talking about in the moment. And what she was crying out for was a relational heart level connection with me where we were in it together and where I could tell her I'm exhausted. And I just missed it with her. I was being totally non-relational. It was simple enemy mode and as a result, that was a very painful encounter and the beginning of a little bit of a wake up, although it's been recent years. So I would say to a woman in a situation like that, obviously you need to protect yourself. You need to get some help for yourself. You need to pray that your husband would be willing to get some help for himself, because typically the wounds that we carry into marriage came from way back. And we don't even know how we became that person who is harsh, demanding, an enemy mode type of operator, my way or the highway, or milder expressions. Well, there are good psychological and biblical reasons for how you became that person. And often it's a journey of trauma recovery and, good interventions with an attachment specialist, an emotional focused. I'm in therapy myself for the first time in 6 decades because I needed more help than I could get otherwise, and it's been a revelation, and it's just the beginning of that journey.
Right. Thank you for bringing up trauma. In my world, I think that's perhaps more common than many people may realize, and the patterns before marriage that become so large in marriage. I see so many husbands and wives that see each other as the enemy, and we're not talking about continuing to be hurt, but just coming to the place where I am seeing you, my spouse, as a human being can kind of change everything. I will often talk to couples about not lobbing hand grenades across the room at their spouse, but seeing whatever the issue is as something that they are sitting on the same side of the table working together with. And I think that would be a relational way of addressing a problem.
That's right. And I think everyone who wants to have a happy marriage would agree with what you just said. Let's come to the table and reason together.
Yeah.
And yet the thing I'm realizing as well is you can go into enemy mode in a flash.
Yes.
And even before you can consciously explain why you shifted, and then you can stay in it for hours, but how did it start? So I'll give you a story from last night. I was tired. It was late. I was cleaning up the kitchen. I was taking care of our pets. Deborah was knitting. And I walked towards our bedroom carrying our water bottles to the bedroom, and she asked me one simple question. And I immediately went into enemy mode. And that led to a very painful discussion and more this morning. And looking back on it now, as we did the postmortem of that interaction, and the one thing we have going for us now is we can talk about it.
Yes.
Years ago, and even more recently than that, we couldn't talk about it because I was totally unaware, and you're the problem, not me. Why did I go there? Well, there are some deep reasons in my life about why that is a well-worn neural pathway. My force fields go up. I'm all in defensive mode. And who are you to ask me a reasonable question? But it triggered something in me. And actually, it probably triggered something from when I was 12 and when I was 5 and earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and so a man who wants to be all that God created him to be, to live from his best self, I would say you need to man up and go talk to somebody who can help you.
I like
Uh,
that. I like that. I'm going to invite you to do a little postmortem on something I experienced a little while ago. Um, I am part of a board of directors of a certain organization, and I knew prior to this particular meeting that there was something important that was going to be discussed, and I believed I had something to say, and that my perspective would not be shared by all of by at least a number of the other people that were going to be in the room. And I rehearsed what I was going to say prior, and as I was rehearsing, I thought to myself, that sounds kind of angry, so I changed some of my language. I wanted to deal with my heart, and I recrafted what I was going to say a lot more we than you or I was trying to make myself part of the group in addressing this. And when the time came during the meeting for me to say what I had prepared to say, I still I felt my heart racing. I felt my muscles tense. I was definitely, keyed up, the fight flight free kind of response. And I could feel the tenor of my voice changing. I was working very hard to stay calm. What I had to say was not received well. And there were hand grenades lobbed back at me. I was attacked. And I felt like I had completely failed. And I have been trying to sort out since that episode, what about me could have been different? Not necessarily, I can't change them. And maybe I couldn't have changed the situation. Maybe I did it as best as the other people in the room could have received. But just maybe a couple thoughts about how to think about that kind of thing. Are you hearing anything in my description that maybe you want to call me out on? Just another person hearing that.
well, let's talk about the culture of that board before we talk about what you could have done differently. That may be a toxic culture to begin with. It may be a totally non-relational endeavor where we put lip service. I don't know the organization. I'm just
Yeah.
speculating in the dark, but maybe it's a great mission and a great vision, and we all believe in it. But as we go about it, we're not being relational at all. And rather than keep the relationship around the table bigger than whatever the problem is, we immediately go into that. And the other thing I hear when you're raising a concern from your heart and you get attacked, that is a Pandora problem. That is narcissism unleashed. And you know it because of the self-justifications that come. Whenever somebody feels attacked and their immediate response, but you, it's an attack. And that's narcissism. And that's unhealthy.
Mm.
And frankly, life is too short to spend a whole lot of time with people who operate that way. Sadly, that's the norm. It's the norm on elder boards in churches. It's the norm in nonprofit boards, Christian and otherwise. And that is not a reflection of the Spirit of Christ. And you got to ask yourself, how much energy do I want to pour into this thing if that's the way my heartfelt concerns are going to be received? And if the first response from them is not, Lord Jesus, what do you want us to notice right now?
Mhm. Mhm.
Lord Jesus, our sister has raised a concern, and rather than attack, because what your body was feeling like, it was the fear, because you probably knew at some level it was going to go that way,
Yeah.
because you have a history with those people.
Yes.
Now, for those type of conversations, it's always good to use the relational sandwich. And our friends in the book Rare Leadership that Jim Wilder wrote with Marcus Warner, he talked about when you have to have that conversation with somebody, you always lead with relational and you always end with relational. And so you start with, I value you. I'm so thankful for you. And what you're doing, and I've done this in the workplace, what you're doing is you're helping hopefully their relational circuit stay online when you're about to tell them something hard.
Mhm.
And you do that with gratitude, you do that with appreciation. And I've seen God work in you, and I so believe in what we're doing, and I'm so thankful for you.
Yeah.
Now the Lord has laid a concern on me that I need to just tell you about. And then at the end you say, now I know that was hard and hard to receive, and I know we're going to be able to work through it, but can we reason together? Can we get to a better place and do it together? Now, I have no idea what you told them. I have no idea who they are,
Right.
but that's my advice. And frankly, you said you said what you felt the Lord led you to say, and you left it on the table, and you've done your duty. And it's something to pray about. Okay, Jesus, what do you want me to notice about that encounter, and how do you want me to engage with that group going forward?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate also that perhaps this illustrates um, us getting out of enemy mode
Mhm.
doesn't guarantee what's going to happen
That's right.
around us. This doesn't mean life
Mhm.
is not difficult.
That's
Jesus
right.
never promised that anyway. And that sometimes disengaging is what is required. You alluded a little bit to churches and elder boards and nonprofit boards, and I do want to go there for a minute too. Just because people name the name of Christ or that God is working in an organization doesn't mean the culture is healthy or that there isn't enemy mode, especially intelligent enemy mode going on. And I just want to give you a moment to really point out that too, because I see that as a big problem also.
I think for the past 50 years or more in America, now I can't speak to the world, but in America, we have modeled our churches and our nonprofits after the entrepreneurial leaders who had extraordinary success. And all of them, with almost out exception, were driven by vision and mission.
Yeah.
Now, vision and mission are very important, but vision and mission are not the most important thing in the mind of God, I think. The most important thing in the mind of God is becoming a people. And you do not become a people through putting a vision and mission on the wall or even talking about it every time you gather. You become a people by loving one another, by being attached to one another. And so I see this toxic culture all over the place because of the elevation of vision and mission. And, we learned it from the megachurch successes. We learned it from Harvard Business School. We learned it from Jack Welch. And it just is not how human beings change their work and change their lives. What changes us are the people we love. We're shaped by whom we love. Now, what about love in the workplace? Well, can we have joy together with the team in the workplace? You better believe we can. We can be happy to be together, doing something together that's making a difference for our customers, our clients. So vision and mission is a problem. The other thing that's a problem, so if this other model that is very toxic, I think, is this Moses. The senior leader is like Moses, and he goes up on the mountain and gets this vision from God and comes down and tells you what it's going to be. And this is the vision for the next 5 years. And I heard this directly from God. Well, you know what? Yeah, God has done that a time or two in history, but most of the time he reveals his vision and mission to a people. And if he reveals it to you, senior pastor, he's going to also have revealed it to other elders and other leaders. And it's going to be a group thing, a we thing.
Yeah.
So I think we would do well to think about, and you look at the New Testament, all those one another's, love one another, bear
There's
with
a
one
lot of
another,
them. Yeah.
forgive one another, all of them. There's like 60 plus of them. They're in the context of the local church and not just in your home Bible study,
Yeah.
but also in how the elder board does its business. And so if we're all about the stuff, the tasks, and we're not about becoming a people together as elders, something is wrong.
Mm. Yes. Yes. Your book is Escaping Enemy Mode. And you've alluded to a number of things, but let's just get explicit kind of as we kind of point toward the end here. How do we get out? You're alluding to, and you make the point that we can't promise to not get into it because that happens very quick in brain time and our bodies respond, but recognizing it and then just a couple words about how do we get out of it when we feel that going on.
Well, I mean, the first step is to know that it's a thing. So you need to know that there is this phenomenon. And then the first step though, to getting out of it is recognizing it in your own body. And we have a whole chapter devoted to this, asking yourself frequently throughout the day, am I in relational mode right now? And how does that feel in my body? Am I in enemy mode right now? And how does that feel in my body? And when you'll notice how things feel in your body, enemy mode feels terrible. And it feels like I'm all alone. No one sees me. And it's just a constant state of overwhelm and stress. And some of us can function that way for decades, but it's toxic to our health, both spiritually and physically. So first part is recognizing it. Now, the second thing that's real important is admitting it to yourself and others and putting words to it. And if you could find a person or people that you could say to them, I'm in enemy mode right now with the barista who was snappy with me. I'm in enemy mode with that person who cut me off in traffic. I'm in enemy mode with my mother-in-law. If we could verbalize that and people who without judgment could then help us unpack our intent, help us understand, and then help us, play with the trigger, because if we can recognize it and admit it, we're on the way. Now, here's another thing. Sometimes we can neither recognize and are not willing to admit.
Yeah.
We all need help sometimes. We need a rescue attachment to whom we give permission to call us out.
That's good.
And it could be a spouse, although oftentimes, and this has been in my personal story, Deborah has permission to tell me when she sees me going into enemy mode, but it's a double-edged sword, because if I'm staying in enemy mode when she says that, I'll say, no, I'm not. You are. Yeah. Because I will go on the attack. Yeah. But if and so there have been times where I've done that. There have been other times she was hearing me on the phone with a salesperson, and we've all had these hard conversations with people trying to either sell us something or service something that we bought. And she was listening to me, and she made eye contact with me, and she said, don't go into enemy mode. Don't go into enemy mode. And in the moment, I was just relational enough to take a breath while the individual was talking, to calm down my central nervous system, to engage the parasympathetic, to recognize that I was slipping into, because I always have thought if I just get louder and be more logical, I'll convince them and overpower them with my personality. Doesn't work very well.
Yep. Yep.
I was able to get through in that conversation relationally, but she was my rescue attachment. So those are some steps. There are plenty others. And then the real question our book lands with is, how can we become people who love even our enemies? And how can we be a people who form cultures where it's common for us to attach to the enemy? And biblically, we have no enemies, other than the enemy of our soul, Satan. But we have people very different than us who sure feel like an enemy, because they're sure not us people, they're them people. But if we can, as a group, become people who feed and spend time with people very different than us, and attach to them and see in them what God is doing, that's a game changer. And that can become our part of our character.
makes me think of Romans 8:29. God's purpose for us is to become conformed to the image of his son, become like Jesus. And I think all our listeners and viewers will know Jesus said on the cross, forgive them for they know not what they do. The ability to do that, that's what God is creating in us, and to become a people that together move toward that powerful picture, powerful inspiration to allow Jesus to do that with us, and to learn the brain science and theology to help us get there. Ray,
Yeah.
this has been awesome. For people who may be intrigued and want to find out more, just invite them to connect with the book and your resources, and there's a lot available.
So we have a website, escapingenemymode.com, and it gives a high-level overview of what enemy mode is. It tells you where they can get a copy of the book. Of course, the book is available wherever books are sold. We at Life Model Works are selling copies. Amazon has copies. Barnes and Noble has copies. We also have a podcast that we're beginning to drop episodes. We've got one episode wherever podcasts are found, Spotify, Apple, other platforms. And we're going to talk to people who are escaping enemy mode with us. And it's really going to be a fun journey. We also have a free study guide. And so if someone would go to escapingenemymode.com, scroll close to the bottom and give us your first and last name, you'll get an email with a link to download a free study guide that you can study individually or with a group. And actually, we would encourage you, get a couple copies of the book, get the study guide, and study it in your living room, study it at the break table at work, and go through it together. Now, the book is written for the world. It's not specifically written to the church. We make no bones about it. We're believers. We love Jesus, but we know the church is not performing too well in this area right now, as being known as people who love their enemies. And so we're calling out the church to be our best selves, and we're calling out ourselves to be our best selves. Now, the other thing I would tell your listeners is that this is all coming from the life work of Dr. Jim Wilder and others at Life Model Works. And we bring the Bible and brain science together to create practical tools that will help people actually be transformed into the image of Christ, to become people who live fearlessly and love like Jesus did. And so if people want to know more about Life Model Works, they can go to lifemodelworks.org. We've got a lot of resources there. We've got a blog. We've got a bookstore filled with resources, and we'd love to hear from people and get you connected to opportunities both with us and with partner ministries so you can continue your journey to transformation.
Transformation. Love it. We'll make sure all those links are available accompanying this episode. Ray, many, many blessings to you. Pass on our thanks to Dr. Jim Wilder for his long work and pioneering work in some of these areas, and many blessings to Life Model Works as you're the director there. May God bless you, your family, and may we continue to be transformed together.
Thank you, Carol. It's been a joy.
If you see and experience others as adversaries, I hope that this conversation has inspired and challenged you to learn a different way to live, and to learn the ways that you can engage your brain so that you can recognize and get out of enemy mode. I love the reality of this book and the work that Ray Woodridge and Dr. Jim Wilder have done. They are not saying you've just got to try harder not to get in enemy mode. They are recognizing that as humans, that doesn't happen. But how can we get out of it? How can we get back to the way of relating as Jesus did? Do check the links under this video. We'll have the link to Escaping Enemy Mode and to the Life Model Works organization, to the book, to some of the social media accounts where you can connect with this organization. And I have been blessed myself and would invite you to check out all that as well. I want to thank you for being part of our family here. I would invite you to subscribe to this channel. We put up a new resource here on YouTube usually every week. And to be notified when that happens, just click subscribe. I would invite you to tell others about this and share this material as well. If you have a comment, Nothing means more to me than when you comment. So leave a comment under this video. If you have a confidential comment, come over to drcarolministries.com, use the contact page there, and that is confidential, and I would be honored to hear from you. And now, until next time, may God bless you.